Greetings, this is a very strange Aeon. Welcome to my video. Ranger. Ranger's defining feature is its pet. Is the only base profession that has a pet, and these pets come in a large varieties. As such, technically it is probably the class with the most build variety in the game, if you're prepared to use all 40 or so pet bar of time of writing. As a rule, Ranger is actually probably one of the most balanced classes. It doesn't stick out to me as being overly offensive, overly defensive, but actually relatively flexible in mid-ground. One slightly amusing aspect about the Ranger is that I would argue most of its weapons aren't very long-ranged. The longbow is. In fact, the longbow is probably one of the best long-range weapons in the game, especially for World v World sieges. But other than that, all of its weapons generally want you to be pretty close, and even its other ranged weapons have their optimal damage at near melee range. So if you think about this character as sort of a long-range Legolas, you might be disappointed. Another thing that annoys me about the Ranger is guns. It can't use them. I don't know why. For some reason, ArenaNet insists on not giving the Ranger access to any guns. This is just a personal pet peeve of mine, though, and doesn't really affect gameplay. Druid. Druid generates energy by healing allies and harming enemies, which can eventually allow it to turn into a special celestial form. Said celestial gains access to multiple abilities, all of which are basically healing and supporting orientated. As you may have guessed by how its ability works, Druid is often seen traditionally as a support character. In fact, it was the first pure support in Guild Wars 2, and has traditionally played very well into that role, and as a very good pure support and utility-oriented character. That said, in recent days, they have started to allow more offensive builds for Druid, the right setup. The more offensive-oriented Druids tend to be built around a combination of condition damage, stealth, and crowd control, and are actually probably my favorite way of playing Ranger. Druid gains access to Staff, a long-ranged weapon that is purely supportive. It has very little in the way of damage capacity, but large amount of movement and healing and utility. Soul Beast. You know how I said the defining feature of Ranger was a pet? Well, now you can get rid of it. Soul Beasts have the ability to merge with their pets. This allows them to gain some buffs as well as gaining access to certain moves based on their pet. This means even more so than normal Rangers, it feels like you have a huge amount of variability in terms of Soul Beast builds, as the moves you gain access to are different depending on which pet you have equipped. Soul Beasts are generally the most aggressive Rangers, tending to be pure DPS orientated, and generally have some of the highest burst potential in the game in the right circumstances. They tend to be less defensive, although they're necessarily squishy depending on how you've built them. One thing worth mentioning about Soul Beasts is that abilities that would normally affect your pet will now affect you while you are merged with your pet. This can create a very powerful set of combos. There are several Ranger abilities that temporarily boost their pet's damage dramatically. Utilizing these abilities all on yourself can cause you to do an incredible amount of burst damage, and as such there's a bit of a stereotype for Soul Beasts being the ones who always want to be chasing the highest numbers in the boss fight. Soul Beast gains access to main hand dagger, a melee condition weapon. Untamed. Untamed is the most pet-oriented of the Rangers. It can flip between whether it or its pet is unleashed at any one time. While its pet is unleashed, the pet will gain several different bonuses, as well as gain access to certain very powerful moves. When you're unleashed, you will in turn, but you will also gain access to a special ambush attack while you are unleashed. The pet will also gain its original moves, which you can then use. Untamed is built around quickly shifting between these two stances to gain the best effects, and generally it wants to be coordinating closely with its pet, much more like a mechanist. This is compared to the other Rangers who have a tendency to either just forget about their pets, consider them a nice little damage add, or just absorb them into themselves. Yum, 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 yum. Untamed generally plays in an offensive manner, though can provide some support and utility while doing so. There are some unusual healing builds you can build with Untamed. They notably revolve around using the ambush for either staff or maces. These are rather unconventional. You can look into them if you want. Untamed grants access to Hammer, a melee weapon with a large amount of crowd control and utility. At least that is the case for most Rangers. In the hands of the Untamed, while your pet is unleashed, it will behave like that. But when you're unleashed, it will become a pure offensive weapon with similar moves to the original version, with increased damage and ability to exploit crowd control effects. This doubles down on the Untamed's tendency to want to constantly flip between its stances in order to get the most benefits from its abilities. Well, that should wrap it up for Ranger. Happy hunting.